Freedom was being declared, but not for everyone. When Jefferson first drafted the Declaration, he condemned.
The year was 1776. The air was thick with tension, fear, and the sound of revolution whispering through the colonies. Men gathered in Philadelphia, their hearts burning with the idea of freedom, a new nation, born from rebellion. But behind those doors, where quills scratched parchment and ideals soared like eagles, a quiet hypocrisy lingered. Thomas Jefferson, a man of intellect and vision, penned the words that would echo through time. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Yet outside that room, in the fields and kitchens of the colonies, hundreds of thousands of enslaved people continued to toil in silence. 700,000 souls bound by chains, denied humanity, while their masters spoke of liberty. Freedom was being declared, but not for everyone. When Jefferson first drafted the Declaration, he condemned slavery outright. He wrote that it was a cruel war against human nature itself. But his words never made it to the final version. Southern delegates demanded they be removed. Unity, they argued, was more important than equality. So the paragraph was erased. The ink dried over silence. And the foundation of a free nation was laid on the backs of those still enslaved. Imagine being one of them, hearing the church bells ring, the cannons roar in celebration of independence, and knowing that your chains still held tight. Even some of the founding fathers who signed that sacred document owned human beings. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin once did, too. They fought for freedom while denying it to others. It wasn't just contradiction, it was a tragedy written in plain sight. But within that contradiction, a spark still ignited. Because among those words, all men are created equal. Future generations found a weapon more powerful than any musket. Abolitionists, civil rights leaders, and dreamers yet unborn would point to that line and say, America, live up to your promise. The enslaved people who heard of this new nation began to dream differently. Some escaped to fight alongside the revolutionaries, believing the cause of liberty might one day include them. Others served the British, promised freedom in exchange for loyalty. Both sides used hope as currency. Ordinary people, farmers, women, black soldiers, native scouts, all played their part, but their names rarely made the pages of history. As the ink dried on that parchment, America was born in contradiction. Liberty on one side, injustice on the other. The world celebrated a new nation of freedom, but deep down, the soul of America was split between what it claimed to be and what it truly was. And that fracture still echoes today. Because the Declaration wasn't just a promise of independence, it was a challenge to live up to the very words that built the nation. All men are created equal. It started as an idea written by imperfect men. But across centuries, it became a call for justice, for inclusion, for every voice that history once silenced. So when you see the fireworks, the flags, and the parades, remember the silence behind the cheers. Remember those whose freedom didn't come that day. Because the true story of independence isn't just about the birth of a nation. It's about the ongoing fight to make its promise real. The summer of 1776. The air in Philadelphia was thick with heat and tension. Inside Independence Hall, 56 men gathered to do something the world had never seen before. To declare independence from an empire. The quill dipped into ink. The words were chosen carefully. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Those words would define a nation. But behind the ink and the glory, a deeper truth was buried. Because when the bells rang on July 4th, not everyone was free. In fact, nearly 700,000 people were still enslaved across the colonies. Their chains clanked softly beneath the roar of revolution. Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote those words, owned more than 600 enslaved men, women, and children in his lifetime. He wrote about liberty, while others lived his bondage. It's one of history's greatest contradictions. A nation built on freedom that began with human enslavement. But what most people don't know is that Jefferson's original draft told a different story. He did write about slavery. He called it a cruel war against human nature itself. He blamed the British Crown for introducing and sustaining the slave trade. But when the draft reached the Continental Congress, delegates from the southern colonies, especially South Carolina and Georgia, erupted. They threatened to walk out. They said independence would never pass if slavery was condemned. So, in the name of unity, the paragraph was cut, erased, buried before it ever saw daylight. Freedom would come, but only for some. And while the founding fathers signed that document, some of them returned home to plantations powered by the very people those words could have set free. Imagine standing in a crowd on July 4th, hearing the bells of independence ring across the colonies. Watching men cheer for liberty, while knowing that your skin color meant those promises did not include you. That was the reality for hundreds of thousands of Africans and their descendants. Yet even in that contradiction, something extraordinary happened. Those same words, "all men are created equal," would become the weapon of generations to come. Enslaved people heard whispers of freedom and began to dream. They heard about a nation where equality was promised, and they began to hold America to its own words. Some took those dreams to the battlefield. More than 5,000 black soldiers fought in the Revolutionary War, some for the Patriots, others for the British, both sides offering freedom in exchange for loyalty. For many, it was the only path toward dignity. When most people think of the American Revolution, names like George Washington, Paul Revere, and the Battle of Lexington and Concord come to mind. But the story of America's fight for freedom is far richer and far more human than the history books often tell. Meet Sybil Ludington. At just 16 years old, she rode nearly 40 miles through the night, warning colonial militias that the British were attacking. That's twice the distance of Paul Revere's famous ride. Imagine the courage it took for a teenage girl to saddle her horse, ride through the dark, and face dangers from both soldiers and nature. I can't let them be caught off guard. If the men aren't ready, so many will be lost, she thought as she raced through the night. Thanks to her bravery, hundreds of militiamen were prepared to defend their towns. Yet how many people have actually heard of Sybil Ludington? Her story reminds us that courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Courage in the Revolution wasn't limited to teenagers. Thousands of African American men, both enslaved and free, fought on both sides of the conflict, each seeking a promise of freedom that was often denied. "I fight not just for the colonies, but for the hope that one day, my children will be free," said one soldier, preparing for battle. Some were promised freedom by the British, others by the Continental Army, but for many, it was a gamble with their lives. They faced discrimination, dangerous conditions, and the ever-present threat of slavery, but still they marched. Still they fought, because they believed in something bigger than themselves. And then there were the spies. Men often get the credit for victories, but women like Agent 355 of the Culper Ring played critical roles in intelligence that could turn the tide of battle. Every letter, every message, every whispered secret. It could mean life or death. One mistake, and all is lost, thought Agent 355, carefully passing secret messages to the right hands. Through secret codes, hidden messages, and acts of quiet bravery, these women risked everything. Few records survived, and even fewer names are remembered. Yet their contribution was vital to the fight for independence. But the untold stories don't end there. There were countless ordinary people whose actions shaped the outcome of the revolution. Farmers left their fields to fight, often at great personal cost. Many women managed households alone while tending to farms, caring for children, and running small businesses to support their communities. They mended uniforms, gathered supplies, and nursed the wounded, often under threat of attack. "I must keep the home running, or everything we fight for will be lost," thought one woman as she worked by candlelight late into the night. Even children contributed in meaningful ways. Young boys served as messengers, scouts, and aides, carrying messages through dangerous territory. They faced not only the threat of British soldiers, but also harsh weather and long, exhausting journeys. In addition, ordinary townsfolk created secret committees to report loyalist activities. These networks of intelligence were crucial in keeping local militias informed and prepared. The revolution was a collective effort, built on the courage of the ordinary, as much as the strategy of generals. Many overlooked heroes were immigrants who had fled Europe seeking freedom and found themselves fighting for it once again on American soil. They brought skills, knowledge, and resilience, often volunteering for dangerous missions with little recognition. Some towns experienced attacks that left entire communities displaced, forcing people to flee with whatever they could carry. Despite the destruction, these citizens returned to rebuild, ensuring that the spirit of independence lived on. Even the animals played their part. Horses carried messages and supplies across rough terrain, and dogs helped warn of approaching troops. Every element of life during the revolution contributed to the larger effort, in ways history rarely records. The revolution was also a war of ideas. Ordinary people debated the meaning of freedom, governance, and justice around kitchen tables, in taverns, and in churches. These discussions influenced local decisions, shaped militias, and strengthened the resolve of communities to fight for independence. History often remembers the leaders, But real change comes from countless individuals who step up, even when no one is watching. The revolution was won not just by strategy or muskets, but by the human spirit, determination, and countless acts of courage small and large. So next time you hear about the American Revolution, remember Sybil Ludington, the African-American soldiers, the secret agents, the women who ran households, the children who carried messages, the immigrants, and the ordinary townsfolk whose bravery shaped a nation. These are the untold stories of America's stories that remind us courage is never measured by fame, but by action. After Shays' Rebellion, the young United States faced another challenge, uniting a diverse population with very different experiences, beliefs, and ambitions. Farmers in New England, merchants in the cities, immigrants in the ports, and enslaved or freed African Americans all had different visions of what the new nation could be. Across the frontier, life was harsh. Families built homes from scratch, cleared forests, planted crops, and fought to survive in unforgiving landscapes. Every house, barn, and road reflected the sweat and resilience of those who worked unseen. Women carried a tremendous burden, managing households, tending animals, and raising children while husbands were away or serving in militias. Their labor held communities together and allowed the nation to grow. Meanwhile, the displacement of Native Americans continued. Tribes faced betrayal, broken treaties, and forced relocation as settlers moved westward. Generations lost not only their lands, but sacred spaces, hunting grounds, and ways of life. Despite this, many tribes resisted through diplomacy, rebellion, and cultural preservation, quietly maintaining their identity against overwhelming odds. Immigrants played a pivotal role as well. Germans, Irish, and others brought new skills, trades, and traditions. They built communities, schools, and businesses, laying the foundations of towns and cities across the young nation. Often, they faced prejudice and hardship, yet their determination helped shape the economy and culture of America. Education and literacy began spreading, though unevenly. In many rural areas, children learned to read and write under candlelight, often using whatever books or materials were available. Knowledge became a tool for survival, empowerment, and community leadership. And those who could read became leaders in small towns and villages. Tensions between social classes were constant. Many small farmers and laborers felt the growing power of wealthy elites in government and commerce. Debates over taxes, property rights, and voting authority frequently erupted into protests and minor uprisings, revealing the fragility of the young republic. Yet, through compromise, negotiation, and sometimes unrest, these communities helped define the principles of representative government. Religion and faith were also central to daily life. Churches often served as schools, meeting places, and centers for political discussion. Ordinary citizens found strength and resilience through spiritual communities, supporting each other through hardship and uncertainty. Innovation quietly flourished. Blacksmiths, carpenters, and tradespeople created tools, homes, and infrastructure that allowed settlements to thrive. Roads, bridges, and canals were built by collective labor, connecting towns and enabling commerce. While inventors experimented with new ways to improve farming, trade, and transportation, even cultural life persisted despite hardships. Music, storytelling, and local festivals brought communities together, providing relief from backbreaking work and constant uncertainty. These traditions helped forge local identities, giving ordinary people a sense of pride and belonging. Small acts of heroism continued in everyday life. Whether it was a neighbor defending a community from raiders, a teacher walking miles to educate children, or a farmer helping fellow settlers survive a harsh winter, these unrecorded deeds collectively shaped the character of the nation. The lessons from this era are clear. The American dream was never a single event or a declaration. It was a continuous effort of ordinary people, often unrecognized, who built, defended, and preserved the nation through courage, labor, and resilience. Their stories remind us that freedom, prosperity, and opportunity are not gifts. They are earned by those willing to act when no one is watching. These untold stories, from the Revolution to the early frontier, show us that the foundations of America were laid not just in battles and political documents, but in the hands, hearts, and sacrifices of countless individuals whose names may never be remembered. One of them was Peter Salem, a man who fired the shot that killed a British major at the Battle of Bunker Hill. His bravery helped turn the tide of the fight, but few remember his name. Others, like Crispus Attucks, a black and native man killed in the Boston Massacre, became the first martyr of the American Revolution. He died before the nation was born, but his blood was among the first spilled for freedom. And while the men debated in Philadelphia, women were fighting battles of their own, not on the fields, but in homes and farms left behind. They managed crops, protected children, and kept the colonies running. Yet their stories rarely made it into history books. The revolution wasn't just fought with muskets and cannons. It was carried on the backs of ordinary people who believed in a dream that did not yet include them. And still, they fought, because deep inside, they believed that freedom could expand, that the words written in 1776 could one day apply to all. But when the smoke of war cleared, the contradiction remained. The United States declared independence from Britain, but not from slavery. Over the next century, that contradiction would tear the country apart. It would lead to bloodshed, rebellion, and the long road toward civil rights. The Founding Fathers built a nation on ideals so powerful that even their hypocrisy couldn't destroy them. Those ideals outgrew their creators. They became a mirror, forcing America to face itself. Frederick Douglass once asked, "What, to the slave, is the 4th of July?" His words cut through the illusion of celebration. He said the holiday revealed the gross injustice and cruelty of a nation that preached liberty but practiced oppression. And yet, even he, a man born into slavery, believed in the promise of the Declaration. Because within its contradictions lay a truth too powerful to ignore. The words could not be contained. From abolitionists to civil rights leaders, from suffragists to modern activists. Those words became a torch, lighting the way toward the freedom that was once denied. All men are created equal. They were written by imperfect men, but they became a prophecy for a more perfect nation. Today, we read those words with both pride and pain, because they remind us that America's story isn't finished. It's still being written by every person who dares to demand the truth. So when the fireworks explode across the sky, and flags wave in celebration, remember this: July 4th wasn't the end of America's fight for freedom. It was just the beginning. The real story behind the Declaration of Independence isn't about perfection. It's about the promise, a promise that each generation must decide whether to fulfill or forget. It was the early 1900s. A new generation of Black Americans had survived the chains of slavery and the terror of Jim Crow. They dreamed of something different: independence, dignity, wealth built by their own hands. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, that dream took form in a place called Greenwood, a small district with wide streets, clean buildings, and a heartbeat of ambition. They called it Black Wall Street. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, men and women who built success in a world designed to deny them opportunity. There were barbershops, beauty parlors, grocery stores, a hospital, a public library, even a private aviation company. Money flowed through the community, and every dollar changed hands 6 times before leaving Greenwood. It was more than just an economic powerhouse. It was proof, living proof, that Black excellence could thrive in America. But success has always had enemies. And in 1921, jealousy and hatred collided with devastating force. It began with a rumor. A young Black man named Dick Rowland, a 19-year-old shoe shiner, entered an elevator in a downtown building. Inside was a white woman named Sarah Page, the elevator operator. Something happened. Historians believe he may have tripped or startled her. She screamed. By the next day, newspapers spread the headline, "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator." The truth didn't matter. In the racial climate of the time, a rumor was enough to spark a fire. White mobs began gathering outside the courthouse where Rowland was held. They wanted blood, but the Black community of Greenwood refused to stay silent. Many of them were veterans of World War I, men who had fought for a country that still saw them as less than human. They came armed, ready to protect one of their own. That night, shots were fired. No one knows who pulled the trigger first. But what followed was one of the darkest nights in American history. The mob exploded. By dawn, thousands of armed white men marched toward Greenwood. They looted homes, set fire to businesses, and shot anyone who resisted. Airplanes circled overhead, dropping gasoline bombs onto the rooftops. Yes, airplanes. In 1921, the first aerial assault on an American city wasn't by a foreign enemy, it was by Americans. Against Americans. Within hours, 35 blocks of Greenwood were engulfed in flames. Churches, schools, hospitals, all reduced to ash. Bodies lay in the streets. Eyewitnesses described the sky glowing red like the end of the world. Families fled, hiding in fields, rivers, and cemeteries. Some were captured and held at gunpoint in makeshift detention centers. Others disappeared, their names never recorded. By the time the smoke cleared, more than 10,000 black residents were left homeless. An estimated 300 people were killed, though many believe the number was much higher. Mass graves are still being uncovered a century later. And what did the city do next? They blamed the victims. Insurance companies refused to pay claims. City officials rewrote reports. For decades, schools, newspapers, and politicians refused to even acknowledge it happened. Survivors were told to forget. Children grew up in silence, their history stolen from them. For nearly 100 years, the Tulsa Massacre was erased from textbooks, a deliberate act of historical amnesia. It was as if an entire world had been burned twice, once by fire, and again by silence. Yet even through that silence, survivors rebuilt. People like Mother Randall and Otis Clark, who lived to tell the story, never stopped speaking truth. They rebuilt homes, reopened shops, and raised families. Because to them, survival was resistance. The story of Tulsa isn't just a tragedy, it's a mirror. It shows what happens when hate is fueled by lies, and it reveals the strength of a people who refuse to vanish. In the ruins of Greenwood, you can still feel the echo of footsteps, the laughter from old photographs, the rhythm of jazz from once busy streets. They remind us that Black Wall Street was more than a place. It was an idea that prosperity, pride, and community could exist even in the face of oppression. But America buried that idea. Until now, because the truth can't stay buried forever. The Tulsa Massacre was not just a crime against a community. It was a crime against history. And history demands to be told. Every generation that rediscovers this story carries the same responsibility to remember, to teach, and to make sure silence never wins again. Greenwood burned, but its spirit survived. Because even in ashes, truth has a way of rising. Imagine being 6 years old. You're taken from your parents in the middle of the night. You don't know where you're going, only that you can't speak your language, wear your clothes, or even say your name again. This was not fiction. This was America, less than 150 years ago. A time when the government didn't just try to erase a people, they tried to erase their identity. And they called it education. By the late 1800s, the United States had conquered the frontier. But to many in power, the Indian problem remained. They didn't want to kill Native Americans. Not anymore. They wanted to change them. So they built boarding schools across the country. More than 400 of them. Children from dozens of tribes, Lakota, Navajo, Apache Cherokee, and many more, were taken by force, often hundreds of miles from home. The promise was, we'll civilize them. The reality was, we'll erase them. The system was created by Captain Richard Henry Pratt, founder of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania. His motto said it all: kill the Indian, save the man. To him, native culture was something to destroy, not preserve. He believed native children could only survive if they abandoned their families, their traditions, and their gods. When children arrived, the transformation began immediately. Their hair was cut short, a deep spiritual violation for many tribes. Their traditional clothing was burned. They were given English names, often biblical or European. And if they spoke their native language, they were beaten or starved. Photos from the time show before and after portraits, smiling native children dressed proudly in tribal attire. Then months later, dressed in stiff uniforms, faces blank, spirits gone. Teachers told them their parents were savages. Their ceremonies were evil. Their gods were false. This was not education. This was cultural genocide. A typical day began at sunrise, with drills, flag raising, and military orders. Children were trained, not as thinkers, but as workers for domestic service, farming, or labor. Many schools were overcrowded and underfunded. Food was scarce, punishments severe. Some students died from disease, malnutrition, or abuse, and their parents were never told. Small graveyards grew behind the dormitories, filled with wooden crosses and nameless stones. But despite everything, despite the cruelty, the children found ways to resist. They whispered their native words under blankets at night. They hummed old songs when no one could hear. Even in silence, their culture survived. For decades, the full truth was buried, literally. Then, in 2021, a shocking discovery changed everything. In Canada, investigators found 215 unmarked graves near the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Soon, more graves appeared, thousands across North America, and the U.S. began to look inward. By 2023, Hundreds of burial sites were identified near American Indian boarding schools, from Alaska to New Mexico. Each grave, a child. Each child, a story never told. They weren't just names on a list. They were sons and daughters who never came home. Now, in their 80s and 90s, the few survivors remember the pain vividly. They told me my mother didn't love me anymore. They washed my mouth with soap when I spoke Lakota. They cut my hair and said my spirit was gone. But they also remember something else. Strength. The strength to hold on to who they were, even when the world tried to erase it. Some later became activists, teachers, and tribal elders, determined to rebuild what was lost. Today, the U.S. government is finally acknowledging this dark chapter. A Truth and Healing Commission has been launched. Tribes are demanding reparations, records, and the return of their children's remains. In classrooms, the story is slowly being taught, not as an act of guilt, but of remembrance. Because only through truth can there be healing. They tried to kill the Indian, but the Indian did not die. From the ashes of those schools rose a new generation, proud, resilient, and louder than ever, speaking their languages, dancing their dances, teaching their children what was stolen from them. History isn't always about what was discovered. Sometimes, it's about what was destroyed, and how the survivors rebuilt what no one could ever take their spirit. They said it was education. But for thousands of Native children, it was a nightmare disguised as a classroom. Imagine being 6 years old. Your home door bursts open at night. Soldiers or agents pull you away from your parents. You're crying. Your mother is screaming. And the only thing you understand is that you can't take your blanket, your clothes, or even your name. That was the reality for generations of Native American children across the United States. Taken from their homes, sent hundreds of miles away to what were called boarding schools. The mission: to civilize the Indian. The truth: to erase them. The man behind this system was Captain Richard Henry Pratt, founder of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania. His philosophy became infamous: kill the Indian, save the man. He believed that native culture was something to destroy, not preserve. The government built over 400 of these schools. Children from tribes like the Lakota, Navajo, Apache, and Cherokee were forced into them. When they arrived, their long hair, a sacred part of their identity, was cut off. Their traditional clothes were burned. They were given new English names, and if they spoke their language, they were beaten. Photographs from that era tell the story better than any textbook. Young Native children in their traditional dress, proud and smiling. And months later, standing stiff in military uniforms, faces blank, eyes hollow. It was more than discipline. It was erasure. Teachers told them their parents were savages. Their songs were forbidden. Their ceremonies were evil. Their gods were lies. Every part of their being was rewritten, reshaped, and stripped away. Each day was ruled by strict order: morning drills, English lessons, religious instruction, and long hours of manual labor. These schools were not about education. They were about obedience. Many were overcrowded, underfunded, and filled with disease. Children starved. Others froze in the winter. Some died trying to run away. And when they did die, their families were never told. They were buried in the schoolyards, beneath the soil that silenced their names. For nearly a century, America looked away. These stories weren't in the history books. Generations grew up never knowing that just beyond their towns stood schools built on stolen childhoods. Then, in 2021, a terrible truth resurfaced. In Canada, investigators found 215 unmarked graves at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. That discovery ignited a wave of grief and reckoning. Soon, more graves were uncovered, not only in Canada, but across the United States too. By 2023, hundreds of burial sites had been found near old boarding school grounds, each one holding the remains of children who never came home. Each one a life erased, a story silenced, but not all was lost. Those who survived carried the truth inside them, the pain, the resilience, and the will to live. Some became activists and leaders, determined to preserve what the schools tried to destroy. They began to teach their languages again, revive ceremonies, and heal their people through storytelling and truth. One survivor said, "They told me my mother didn't love me, but every night I heard her voice in my dreams." Another said, "They cut my hair and said my spirit was gone, but my spirit was stronger than their scissors." The U.S. government has finally begun to confront this history. A Truth and Healing Commission has been formed. Tribes are demanding the return of the children's remains, the release of school records, and the inclusion of this truth in education. Because these aren't just stories, they are warnings. Proof of what happens when power tries to erase identity. Proof that silence is the most dangerous kind of violence. They tried to kill the Indian, but the Indian did not die. From those graves, from those classrooms of cruelty, rose a new generation, proud, fearless, and loud. They speak their languages. They dance their dances. They teach their children the songs their grandparents once had to whisper. History isn't only about what we built. It's about what we broke, and whether we have the courage to rebuild it again. Long before Hollywood lights, Los Angeles had shadows that no history book wanted to remember. October 24, 1871. The streets were quiet, but tension simmered beneath the surface. A small Chinese community had settled in the city, building homes, shops, and lives despite prejudice, discrimination, and constant hostility. But hatred does not wait for an invitation. A mob of nearly 500 men, fueled by rumor, racism, and alcohol, stormed the streets. They dragged innocent workers from their homes, beat them mercilessly, and lynched them in public. The air filled with screams, smoke, and the crackling of fires, consuming the homes and businesses of hardworking families. 18 men were killed that day. 18 lives stolen. Families left with nothing but grief, ashes, and unanswered questions. It became one of the largest mass lynchings in U.S. history, yet it disappeared from textbooks, classrooms, and collective memory. Why? Because it challenged the narrative of a peaceful, progressive city. Because the victims were immigrants, outsiders, deemed less than human by the mob. Because remembering it would mean confronting a history of systemic violence Americans preferred to forget. Eyewitness accounts tell of horror beyond imagination. Chinese men and boys huddled in fear as the mob ransacked homes. Merchants watched their life's work burn while no one came to help. And all around, ordinary citizens either cheered, joined in, or turned their backs. Law enforcement did little, too late, to stop the carnage. Arrests were rare, and justice was almost non-existent. Survivors buried their dead quietly, hoping the world would forget what had happened. And for more than a century, it did. But the story refuses to stay buried. Historians and descendants have pieced together fragments, old newspapers, court records, and oral histories, revealing the brutality, courage, and resilience of those who survived. These were men and boys who worked hard, paid taxes, and contributed to their communities. They were fathers, brothers, sons, people who simply wanted a life of dignity and peace. Their homes were gone, their businesses destroyed, their lives shattered. Yet even in the shadow of terror, their descendants carried on, rebuilding lives, speaking out, and preserving the memory of those lost. The forgotten Chinese massacre of 1871 is a stark reminder. History is not only what is written, but also what is ignored, what is silenced, what society chooses to forget. By confronting it, we honor the victims, acknowledge the cruelty, and teach the lessons that intolerance, unchecked, can lead to unimaginable horrors. Long before the glitz of Hollywood, before the movie stars and red carpets, there were streets filled with grief, bravery, and injustice. And the echoes of that day still remind us, no community should ever be left to face hatred alone, and no massacre should ever be forgotten. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, fear and suspicion swept across the United States. But while the nation prepared for war, thousands of innocent families became targets of that fear. Over 120,000 Japanese Americans, most of them U.S. citizens, were forcibly uprooted from their homes. Men, women, and children were given almost no time to pack their lives into a few suitcases. Homes were abandoned, businesses closed, and livelihoods vanished overnight. They were labeled as enemies, not because of anything they had done, but because of the color of their skin and the ancestry of their parents or grandparents. Families were told they were dangerous, that their loyalty was in question, and that America could no longer trust them. The government sent them to internment camps, vast isolated facilities surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Desert lands, sweltering heat, freezing winters, and makeshift barracks became their new reality. Privacy was non-existent, dignity was stripped away, and the fear of being separated from loved ones loomed constantly. Children tried to adapt. They went to schools in these camps, played in barren fields, and whispered stories of the lives they had lost. Adults struggled to maintain work, routines, and hope in a system designed to remind them of their otherness. Every day, these families faced the psychological toll of confinement. Men worried about what had happened to their businesses and farms. Women tried to maintain normalcy for their children. Elders mourned the life they had once known. And all of them wondered if they would ever be free again. Despite this, Communities within the camps formed. People built small gardens, organized schools, and created support networks to survive the isolation. Art, music, and culture persisted quiet acts of resistance against a system that sought to erase them. It took decades for the U.S. government to acknowledge this injustice. In 1988, the Civil Liberties Act officially apologized and offered reparations. But the scars, emotional, economic, and cultural, remain. Generations of Japanese Americans still carry the trauma of displacement and the lingering question, how could a nation built on freedom treat its own citizens as enemies overnight? The story of Japanese American internment is a reminder that fear can override justice and that prejudice can masquerade as national security. But it also shows resilience. Families who survived rebuilt lives, preserved their culture, and ensured that the lessons of injustice would not be forgotten. History is not always comfortable. It is not always heroic. Sometimes, it is a mirror showing us the consequences of fear, suspicion, and silence. And sometimes, it is the story of ordinary people, children, parents, grandparents, holding on to dignity and hope in the darkest of times. The internment camps stand as a warning. Liberty can be fragile, and freedom must be actively protected. But they also stand as a testament to the strength of the human spirit, and the courage of those who survived, remembered, and insisted that their story be told. Even today, descendants honor the lives lost, the homes abandoned, and the courage shown in the face of injustice. Because remembering is not just about the past, it is about ensuring that such mistakes never happen again. After the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the United States was gripped by fear. But amid this fear, an injustice quietly unfolded, one that would affect over 120,000 Japanese Americans, most of them U.S. citizens, who suddenly became enemies in their own country. Families were given mere days to pack their lives into a few suitcases. Homes, businesses, farms, everything they had worked for was abandoned. Banks froze accounts, businesses were looted, and lives built over decades vanished almost overnight. Children clung to their parents, bewildered and frightened, while elders wept for the life they had known. The government justified this as national security, citing loyalty concerns. But in truth, it was fueled by racial prejudice, wartime paranoia, and decades of anti-Asian sentiment on the West Coast. Men, women, and children were uprooted from familiar neighborhoods and sent to internment camps, isolated, barbed wire prisons in the deserts and remote regions of the country. Life in the camps was harsh. Families were crammed into tiny barracks with thin walls and little privacy. Winters were bitter, summers unbearably hot, and sanitation and medical care were minimal. Every day was a test of endurance, dignity, and spirit. Children tried to adapt. They went to makeshift schools, played in empty fields, and clung to stories of the life they had lost. Adults worked wherever they could, attempting to maintain some normalcy, yet constantly reminded of their status as prisoners. Elders grieved the culture, traditions, and freedom stripped from their families. Despite these conditions, communities within the camps grew resilient. People planted gardens in the arid soil, organized schools and libraries, and formed cultural groups to preserve their heritage. Music, art, and storytelling became lifelines, quiet acts of defiance against the system that sought to erase them. Many men enlisted in the U.S. Army from the camps, serving bravely in segregated units like the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, one of the most decorated in American history. Their service was both a demonstration of loyalty and a refusal to let injustice define them. For decades, the trauma of displacement, lost property, and social stigma lingered. Generations of Japanese Americans grew up with the memory of internment, shaping their identities, even as the world moved on. Homes were never returned to some families. Businesses never reopened. The emotional and economic toll was profound. It wasn't until 1988 that the U.S. government formally acknowledged this injustice with the Civil Liberties Act, issuing apologies and reparations. But no payment could fully restore what had been lost. Childhoods stolen, communities shattered, and trust betrayed. The story of Japanese American internment is a sobering reminder that freedom can be fragile. When fear, prejudice, and wartime hysteria converge, even citizens of a free nation can become victims. Yet it is also a story of courage, resilience, and dignity. Families rebuilt their lives, preserved their culture, and made sure the lessons of this dark chapter were passed to future generations. Even today, descendants honor the experiences of their parents and grandparents. They teach the history of the camps, the bravery of those who endured, and the importance of vigilance against injustice. They show that remembering is not only about the past, it is a commitment to a better future. History is not always comfortable. It is not always heroic. Sometimes it is a mirror showing us the consequences of fear, suspicion, and silence. The Japanese-American internment camps remind us that liberty must be protected actively and that justice delayed is justice denied. Through suffering, families found ways to survive and to thrive. They kept their stories alive, ensuring that the lives affected, the homes lost, and the dignity threatened would never be forgotten. Their endurance speaks to the strength of the human spirit, and their voices continue to warn future generations. Never allow fear to outweigh justice. Even in the face of betrayal by their own country, Japanese Americans survived. They rebuilt communities, remembered the lessons, and reclaimed the freedom that had been stolen. Their story is not just one of suffering, it is a testament to resilience, hope, and the enduring fight for justice in the American story. Throughout American history, women have been at the heart of change, yet their stories are often invisible, buried beneath the pages of history books that celebrate men. Take Sybil Ludington, a 16-year-old girl who rode twice the distance of Paul Revere to warn colonial forces of British attacks. Brave, determined, and fearless, she galloped through the night, rain pouring down, the enemy possibly at every turn. Her ride saved lives and helped protect communities. Yet how many learned her name in school? How many knew her courage rivaled the most famous figures of the Revolution? Decades later, in Montgomery, Alabama, a young girl named Claudette Colvin refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus, months before Rosa Parks became a household name. Arrested at just 15, her bravery challenged the status quo, igniting legal battles that would help dismantle segregation. But politics, image, and the desire to select a perfect symbol often overshadowed her story. She became a footnote, while the world celebrated others. Women like these were not exceptions. Across wars, revolutions, and social movements, countless women worked, fought, and led, often in silence or under the radar. From nurses in battlefields to factory workers fueling industrial America. From spies delivering secret intelligence to educators and activists shaping minds. Their contributions were essential yet ignored. During the Civil War, women like Clara Barton transformed battlefield medicine. With limited resources, dangerous conditions, and little recognition, they saved thousands of lives. Black women and men also played vital, overlooked roles, ensuring that justice and freedom slowly advanced even in the harshest conditions. In every movement, the fight for civil rights, women's suffrage, or labor reform, women were the backbone. They organized, protested, wrote, and educated. They bore risks without the promise of recognition. Often, history recorded only the men who stood in the spotlight. Why were these women erased? Patriarchy, societal norms, and politics conspired to minimize their impact. Some were considered too young, too poor, too imperfect to represent movements. Others were silenced because their race or class made their stories inconvenient for the narratives that dominated textbooks. Yet erasure does not mean disappearance. Their courage, vision, and determination endured. Their actions inspired generations, quietly shaping the course of the nation. The teenager who rode through the night, the young girl who refused to move, the countless mothers, daughters, and leaders who dared to challenge injustice. They were the invisible threads, holding the American story together. Recognizing these women changes how we see history. It teaches us that leadership, bravery, and influence are not confined to men in power. They exist wherever people dare to act with courage, intelligence, and heart. Today, we honor them. We tell their stories, not as mere anecdotes, but as essential truths. From Sybil Ludington to Claudette Colvin, from countless unnamed nurses, workers, and activists. Their legacy lives in every act of justice, every fight for equality, and every time someone stands against oppression. History is not complete without them. And though patriarchy once tried to write them out, their voices cannot be silenced forever. They remind us that courage is often quiet, unrecognized, and persistent, and that the true story of America has always been written by the women who refuse to be invisible. Throughout American history, women have shaped the nation in ways that often go unrecognized. Their courage, intelligence, and perseverance have altered the course of events. Yet countless stories have been buried beneath the achievements of men, celebrated in textbooks. Take Sybil Ludington, a 16-year-old girl who, in the dead of night, rode over 40 miles, twice the distance of Paul Revere, to warn colonial troops of an impending British attack. She rode through rain and darkness, risking her life to protect communities, ensuring that the militia could prepare and defend themselves. Her bravery saved countless lives, yet her name remains largely unknown outside specialized history circles. Decades later, a young girl named Claudette Colvin in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus at just 15 years old, months before Rosa Parks. Arrested and vilified for her defiance, she became a symbol of resistance that history nearly erased. Political considerations chose to spotlight Rosa Parks instead, leaving Claudette's courageous act almost invisible. Yet her action inspired legal battles that helped dismantle segregation. These stories are not exceptions. Women across history, often young, marginalized, or overlooked, were at the heart of every movement, every battle, and every push for progress. They were nurses saving lives on Civil War battlefields, like Clara Barton, who organized care for the wounded under dangerous conditions and without recognition. They were the invisible laborers of factories fueling industrial America, women who kept households together, while also participating in labor strikes to demand fair wages. In the fight for civil rights, suffrage, and labor reforms, women were often the organizers, the strategists, and the educators. They marched, protested, wrote letters, risked imprisonment, and sometimes even their lives. Yet history frequently recorded only the men who stood in public spotlight. Women like Ida B. Wells investigated lynchings, challenged systemic racism, and advocated for justice, all while facing threats from white supremacists, determined to silence them. Even in espionage and war, women contributed in ways often erased from official records. Women like Agent 355, in the Revolutionary War, transmitted critical intelligence to the Continental Army. During World War II, countless women served as codebreakers, factory workers, and resistance organizers. Yet their contributions were minimized, hidden, or uncredited. Why were these women erased? Patriarchy, politics, and societal norms often dictated which stories were acceptable to celebrate. Some were deemed too young, too poor, too imperfect, or too radical to represent movements or achievements. Others were silenced because their race, class, or gender made them inconvenient to the dominant historical narrative. Yet, erasure did not mean disappearance. Their courage persisted, quietly shaping the nation behind the scenes. Teenagers riding through stormy nights, girls refusing to surrender their dignity, mothers protecting their children, activists defying oppression, all were threads in the fabric of America's story. Their actions created ripple effects, inspiring others to fight for justice and equality, even when history refused to acknowledge their names. Recognizing these women changes our understanding of history. It reveals that leadership, bravery, and influence are not confined to those in power or to men in the public eye. They exist wherever people dare to act with courage, intelligence, and conviction. Their influence is woven into every significant social and political advance in American history. Today, their stories are being reclaimed. Schools, books, documentaries, and public memorials are beginning to honor the women who history tried to forget. From Sybil Ludington to Claudette Colvin, from nurses and labor organizers to spies and activists. Their legacy lives in every act of resistance, every fight for equality, and every time someone dares to challenge injustice. History is incomplete without them. Even when patriarchy tried to silence them, their voices endured. They remind us that courage often goes unrecognized, that influence is not always visible, and that the true story of America has always been written by women who refuse to be invisible. In classrooms, communities, and homes today, remembering these women matters. Their stories teach us resilience, strategy, and perseverance. They remind us that ordinary people can perform extraordinary acts, and they challenge each generation to look beyond the surface of history, to question what was recorded, and to honor those who were erased. The women who were erased are not lost. They live in every movement for justice, every act of defiance against oppression, and every voice that refuses to be silenced. From the Revolutionary War to the Civil Rights Movement, from suffrage battles to labor strikes, women shaped the American story, whether history recognized them or not. Their courage, sacrifice, and intelligence formed the backbone of the nation. And finally, as we uncover their stories, we understand the truth. America has always been built, not just by the men in power, but by the women who refused to be invisible, who acted boldly, and who changed the course of history from the shadows. Across the United States, the pursuit of the American dream has often been paved with blood, sweat, and struggle. From the coal mines of West Virginia to the bustling factories of Chicago, ordinary workers risked and often lost their lives fighting for the most basic rights: fair wages, safe working conditions, and dignity. In the early 20th century, America was industrializing at a breakneck pace. Railroads, factories, and mines demanded labor around the clock. Men, women, and even children worked long hours in dangerous conditions. Miners faced the constant threat of cave-ins, explosions, and black lung disease. Factory workers operated machines that could sever limbs in an instant. Yet, when they asked for better pay or safer workplaces, their pleas were met with hostility, scorn, or violence. One of the most horrific examples was the Ludlow Massacre of 1914 in Colorado. Coal miners, striking for better wages and working conditions, had set up tent colonies with their families after being evicted from company housing. The National Guard, sent to suppress the strike, opened fire on men, women, and children. The tents were burned. Mothers shielded their children. Men tried to fight back, but 18 lives were lost that day, including women and children. This massacre was not an isolated incident. Across the nation, clashes between workers and authorities were frequent and brutal. Strikes in Chicago, Pennsylvania, and the mining towns of Appalachia often ended with bloodshed. Labor organizers were beaten, jailed, or killed. Companies hired armed guards or militias to break unions. The press sometimes sided with the corporations, painting striking workers as troublemakers or radicals. Yet, the courage of these laborers was extraordinary. Men and women risked imprisonment, injury, or death for the idea that every worker deserved dignity. Women, too, played critical roles, organizing kitchens, medical care, and schools within tent colonies, as well as participating directly in protests and marches. Children, though young, understood the stakes, watching their parents fight for survival and justice. The labor movement eventually led to significant reforms. Workers won the right to unionize. Child labor was curtailed, working hours were reduced, and safety regulations were implemented. But these victories came at a staggering human cost. Entire families were traumatized, communities scarred, and many lives lost along the way. The story of the labor wars teaches that the American dream was never free. It was earned through struggle, sacrifice, and the refusal to accept injustice. It reminds us that progress often comes at a human price, and that ordinary people, when united by purpose, can demand a fairer society. History, however, often overlooks these sacrifices. The miners, factory workers, and their families rarely appear on monuments or in textbooks. Their names are forgotten, but their bravery endures in labor laws, workplace protections, and the rights that many Americans now take for granted. Even today, labor movements exist because of the foundation built by those who fought and died in strikes, protests, and uprisings. Their legacy is a reminder that freedom, fairness, and safety are not automatic. They are achieved through courage, solidarity, and relentless struggle. The Ludlow Massacre and countless similar events are warnings. The pursuit of justice can be perilous, but without the courage to stand against oppression, inequality endures. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the sacrifices ordinary people are willing to make to protect the rights of themselves and future generations. From coal mines darkened by soot to factories roaring with machines, the labor wars tell the story of America's working class, invisible yet indispensable, oppressed yet unbroken. They remind us that the nation's wealth, progress, and innovation were built not only by industrialists, but by the hands of those who demanded that their work, their lives, and their dignity mattered. Even now, as labor movements continue worldwide, the echoes of those who marched, fought, and died in tents, streets, and mines resonate. They remind us that liberty and fairness are never guaranteed, and that the fight for justice is ongoing, shaped by the courage of those who refuse to accept exploitation. The labor wars are more than history. They are a living testament to human resilience, sacrifice, and the enduring quest for justice. They show us that progress is never easy, and that the price of equality is often higher than society wants to remember. America's rise as an industrial power was built on the backs of ordinary workers, many of whom endured grueling hours, dangerous conditions, and little to no pay. From the coal mines of West Virginia to the factories of Chicago, men, women, and children labored under circumstances that would shock modern sensibilities. In the coal fields of Appalachia, miners descended into darkness every day, inhaling dust that would scar their lungs for life. Explosions, cave-ins, and gas leaks were constant threats. They carried pickaxes and hope, digging coal that fueled the nation's factories, trains, and cities. Yet, when they demanded fair wages or safer working conditions, they were often met with violence from company guards, local law enforcement, or militias hired to suppress dissent. One of the most notorious tragedies was the Ludlow Massacre of 1914 in Colorado. Miners, striking for basic rights, set up tent colonies with their families after being evicted from company housing. The National Guard, called in to maintain order, opened fire on men, women, and children. Homes and tents were burned. Mothers shielded their children as bullets tore through the air. In the end, 18 lives were lost, including those of women and children. The event shocked the nation, but was often downplayed in mainstream histories. But Ludlow was far from unique. Across the United States, workers organized strikes to demand dignity and fairness. In Chicago, textile workers fought for shorter hours. Steelworkers clashed with armed guards. Immigrant laborers, who made up much of the workforce, faced discrimination while organizing for better treatment. Families were torn apart, and communities lived in fear, yet they persisted. Women played critical roles in these labor movements, often working behind the scenes to sustain strikes and maintain morale. They cooked meals in makeshift kitchens, cared for the sick and injured, educated children in the camps, and sometimes even joined picket lines themselves. Children, too, were witnesses to bravery and sacrifice, learning lessons about justice, solidarity, and courage that would last a lifetime. The laborers faced an uphill battle. Courts often sided with corporations. Media outlets sometimes painted strikers as radicals or troublemakers. Yet the workers' persistence eventually led to victories: recognition of unions, limitations on child labor, safer workplaces, and the establishment of labor laws that still protect American workers today. These struggles illustrate the high cost of the American dream: the freedom to earn a fair wage, to work without fear of death or injury, and to organize collectively was not granted. It was demanded, often at the price of blood and life. The sacrifices of these ordinary people paved the way for the rights and protections many now take for granted. Even after the strikes ended and laws were enacted, the emotional scars remained. Families who lost loved ones, communities that witnessed massacres, and survivors of brutal suppression carried trauma for generations. Yet their stories of resilience, courage, and determination continue to inspire modern labor movements around the world. The labor wars remind us that progress is rarely easy. Change often comes with struggle, sacrifice, and the courage to challenge powerful interests. The victories won by coal miners, factory workers, and immigrant laborers serve as a testament to the resilience of ordinary people confronting extraordinary injustice. History may overlook them, but their legacy endures. From the soot-filled mines to the roaring factories, their fight for fairness shaped the nation. They remind us that democracy and justice are not just ideals. They are battles, fought in tents, on picket lines, and in the streets. The story of the labor wars is more than a tale of oppression and struggle. It is a chronicle of courage, solidarity, and the unwavering belief that every human being deserves dignity and respect in the workplace. The families who endured, the men and women who risked everything for fairness, and the children who witnessed it all, left a legacy that continues to shape America. Even today, as workers advocate for fair pay, safe conditions, and equality, the echoes of the Ludlow Massacre, the strikes of Chicago, and countless other labor struggles resonate. They remind us that liberty and justice are not automatic. They must be earned, defended, and remembered. The labor wars are a testament to the power of ordinary people to confront injustice, challenge oppression, and demand a fairer society. Their stories may not always appear in history books, but their courage built the foundations of the rights and protections many enjoy today. In remembering these struggles, we honor the sacrifices, the bravery, and the resilience of those who refuse to accept exploitation. Their fight reminds us that freedom, justice, and dignity are never free. They are fought for, defended, and cherished across generations. During the tense years of the Cold War, America raced to develop new weapons, secure scientific dominance, and prepare for a potential nuclear conflict. But behind the headlines of technological achievement, a darker story unfolded, one largely hidden from the public for decades. U.S. scientists and government agencies conducted experiments that targeted vulnerable populations, hospital patients, prisoners, and soldiers. Without consent, These individuals were injected with radioactive materials, exposed to dangerous levels of radiation, or used in tests designed to measure the effects of nuclear fallout. Many were unaware of what was happening to their bodies, trusting doctors, officers, and authorities to act in their best interest. The experiments had chilling goals. Scientists wanted to understand how radiation affected humans, believing the knowledge would be critical for military strategy and national security. But in pursuit of this knowledge, human dignity and rights were repeatedly violated. Lives were altered, health was destroyed, and many suffered silently for decades before the truth came to light. Hospital patients, already vulnerable due to illness, found themselves used as living test subjects. Prisoners, often from marginalized communities, were exposed to radioactive isotopes to study absorption and effects. Soldiers, sworn to serve their country, were unknowingly placed in experiments that could have long-term health consequences. Many experienced radiation sickness, cancers, or other medical complications years later, unaware that these conditions were the result of secretive government experiments. These experiments were hidden from the public, often classified under national security. Families were never informed, communities were left unaware, and the victims themselves only learned the truth decades later. When government documents were declassified and investigations revealed the extent of these violations, the story of these secret atomic experiments reveals a disturbing reality. During times of fear and competition, ethics can be overridden, and ordinary people can become pawns in the pursuit of power. It is a stark reminder that scientific progress, when divorced from morality, can inflict immense suffering. Despite the secrecy, victims and their families eventually sought recognition, justice, and accountability. Lawsuits, government apologies, and public investigations brought some measure of truth to light. Yet for many, the harm had already been done. Health, trust, and lives were irreversibly altered. The experiments also highlight a broader lesson about vigilance. Society must question authority, demand transparency, and insist on ethical standards, especially when vulnerable populations are involved. Without oversight, even well-intentioned research can become a source of suffering. The Cold War may have ended, but the echoes of these secret atomic experiments remain. Survivor stories continue to inspire discussions on ethics, consent, and accountability. Their experiences remind us that progress achieved at the expense of human dignity is never true progress. History often celebrates technological achievements, military victories, and scientific breakthroughs, but it is equally important to confront the hidden stories, the experiments that violated trust, the people who suffered in silence, and the lessons we must carry forward to ensure such abuses never happen again. The secret atomic experiments serve as a haunting chapter in America's history, a reminder that even in a nation dedicated to freedom and innovation, power unchecked can harm those it claims to protect. Yet through their survival and eventual exposure, the victims demand a reckoning, teaching us that history is not just what is written, but what must be uncovered. Even today, these stories are vital. They teach us vigilance, ethics, and empathy. They remind us that progress must never come at the expense of humanity, and that hidden histories, once revealed, can guide us toward a more just and conscientious society. The secret atomic experiments may have been concealed for decades, but their lessons endure. They compel us to confront uncomfortable truths, honor the lives affected, and ensure that future generations never repeat the mistakes of the past. America's hidden history isn't confined to the pages of textbooks or the dusty archives of the past. It continues to unfold every day, in acts of courage, resilience, and quiet heroism that rarely make headlines but shape the nation in profound ways. Consider the immigrant worker, arriving in a new land with little more than hope and determination. After hurricanes, wildfires, or other disasters, these men and women are often the first on the ground, clearing debris, rebuilding homes, and restoring communities. Their work is grueling and dangerous, yet their names seldom appear in the news. They labor not for fame or recognition, but for the survival and betterment of others. A modern echo of the countless hands that built America in centuries past. Then there is the whistleblower, an ordinary person who risks career, reputation, and sometimes safety to reveal truths that powerful institutions would prefer to hide. They confront corruption, deception, and abuse, often standing alone against formidable forces. Their courage preserves accountability, transparency, and justice, reminding society that democracy requires vigilance, and that one person's voice can spark monumental change. In the streets, In town halls and online, the protester standing alone becomes a symbol of resistance. They speak out against injustice, inequality, or oppression, often in environments that are hostile or indifferent. Their solitary courage can inspire movements, mobilize communities, and change public perception. Though history may not record their names immediately, their impact ripples far beyond a single moment. Hidden heroes are also teachers, nurses, social workers, and volunteers, individuals whose daily efforts protect lives, educate future generations, and uphold the values of compassion, integrity, and service. Their contributions may not be celebrated with monuments or commemorated with holidays, yet they form the backbone of society. These heroes share a common thread. They act with courage and conscience, often without expectation of reward. They embody resilience, empathy, and the quiet determination to make the world better, even when recognition is absent. Their stories are a reminder that heroism is not always public, and that the true measure of a society lies in how it values and protects its ordinary champions. By witnessing and honoring these acts, we connect the past to the present. The struggles of Sybil Ludington, Claudette Colvin, the laborers of Ludlow, and the victims of secret atomic experiments find echoes in today's hidden heroes. Each generation builds upon the courage of the previous, ensuring that America continues to evolve toward justice, fairness, and humanity. Hidden heroes teach us that history is not only written in grand events, battles, or legislation. It is written in the quiet, persistent actions of ordinary people who, despite fear, hardship, or marginalization, step forward to do what is right. Their stories are proof that courage, integrity, and compassion can exist even in the shadows. From rebuilding communities after storms to exposing wrongdoing, from standing alone in protest to serving those in need, these unsung heroes remind us that America's story is ongoing. It is not just in the textbooks, monuments, or museums. It is alive in every act of bravery, every voice for justice, and every hand that lifts another in times of need. By recognizing these hidden heroes, we honor the ongoing legacy of resilience, sacrifice, and courage that has always defined America. Their stories inspire us to look closer, act bolder, and ensure that the principles of justice, freedom, and humanity are not only remembered, but lived, every single day. In a world that often celebrates the loudest voices, hidden heroes show us the power of quiet, persistent action. They prove that one person, sometimes invisible, sometimes overlooked, can shape history, uphold justice, and change lives. And in that truth, we find hope, inspiration, and a reminder that the story of America is still being written by those who dare to act in courage, often unseen, yet profoundly felt.